Camilla Thompson is Australia's leading biohacking expert and executive wellness coach, working with high-performing leaders to optimise their health, performance and longevity. She's the author of Australia's first book on biohacking and the founder of the wellness coach BioHack Me and Mould Safe. After navigating her own burnout and complex health challenges, she now helps executives understand how biology drives performance and why ignoring it eventually shows up in decision quality, culture, and results. Camilla, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you. Good to be here.
So perhaps we could start and you can just introduce yourself beyond what I've just said and tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yes, well, look, it's been one where I've had my own business for many years in London, always had a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit and had my own business in Australia. And then I ended up working in media. I left that business, left my partner at the time, and it was our joint business. So I had to sort of start my career again. So I went into media. I'd worked in journalism many years ago in London. So I was like, this is an avenue I'd like to get back into, but had to start from the very bottom and sort of work my way up through media. And eventually I ended up working for a fantastic content agency and influencer agency. And I just was a bit of a workaholic, really. I worked a lot. I had 2 young kids. I was on my own for a little bit with them. So I went into that sort of survival mode where I was working a lot. I was highly perfectionistic. I was trying to prove to everybody that I was more than capable of doing this job. I worked with a lot of other people that didn't have kids. So I overcompensated a lot. And that just resulted in me getting quite burnt out, just pushing myself really hard and being the rushing woman, as I talk about. Well, Dr. Libby Weaver talks about, but it's, that definitely contributed to my burnout.
Yeah, it's a recurring theme. People who are entrepreneurs and or executives who push themselves, and the thing that made you successful sometimes can work against you. So along that journey, what are the signs do you think that you ignored?
So many. I was completely disconnected from myself. Like, I think when you're stuck in that fight or flight and survival mode, it's really easy to ignore the signs. And we just keep pushing and pushing. I was unwell, but I just kept going to work and I felt like something was wrong, but I was blaming it on full moons and Mercury being a retrograde. And then I felt really weird and heavy and I didn't feel right. And, I had a really bad infection and I ignored it. So eventually my body gave me the wake-up call and I was really unwell. I ended up with sepsis in hospital and I had a really bad kidney infection. So that was a huge wake-up call for me in hospital. And that's when I read the book, Dr. Libby Weaver, The Rushing Woman. And I suddenly realized I had no idea what stress was doing, and that because I was operating at such a high level and so hard on myself and so perfectionistic and everything had to be a certain way. And I was having to hit pretty huge targets as a leader as well. So I think that pressure that I put on myself, as well as the pressure that was involved in my role, meant that I was ignoring the signs that I needed to rest, I needed to recover, that something wasn't right. And it's amazing how the body pushes on when you disconnect from it.
There was a little bit more going on and it escalated with exposure to mould, misdiagnosis, and being told that it was all in your head. And like, I listened to that story and I just found it so confronting. Can you share what happened and ultimately what told you that this wasn't just stress and it was something deeper?
Well, look, I think when I had sepsis and after I went home after having sepsis, my body was very weak and we were living in the eastern suburbs in Rose Bay and I had a beautiful old apartment overlooking the Harbour Bridge, but it was very old and, we didn't pay a huge amount of rent, but it was a beautiful space. But what we didn't realize is there was such a lot of hidden mold in the apartment, and our landlords lived upstairs and they were Polish Jews. They'd been through the Holocaust, they'd been through awful things. And when we told them we had mold, they were just like, oh, mold, it's nothing, get some resilience. So they
Get
just
some
used
disinfectant.
they used to just patch up. We'd have water coming through places in the apartment and it would just get patched up. So I didn't realize how bad mold was. Like, coming from the UK, I had no idea how damaging, and I didn't know what to look for either. So now I know, I'm really across it. You can tell what mold looks like, but at the time I didn't. didn't. So because my body was quite weak from the sepsis, the mold really got into it. And I think that went on for years and years, living in that environment and not realizing that's what was making me ill. And there was 4 of us in a house and only 2 of us used to get sick. The other 2 didn't. And this is a common thing I hear with people, is that they don't realize their home is making them ill because not everyone in the house is sick, because everybody responds differently to mold spores. Some people can actually get rid of them and detox them out of their body. There's a specific genetic predisposition. And others, like me and my younger son, we just held on to the mold and it sort of disrupts all your systems.
From what I recall, so you move out within 24 hours. You diagnosed it. You had an expert come in. You move out from 24 hours. Tell us about that journey over the subsequent months once you'd identified that mold problem.
Well, it was such a relief when we finally worked out what was going on, because as you mentioned previously, I had been backwards and forwards to doctors. I'd spent thousands of dollars on all these tests and everything kept coming back normal. And then eventually I was told it must be stress, it's in your head, it must be hormones. And I eventually started believing myself that maybe I wasn't actually sick, and I was told that I was choosing to be sick. And then I was like, this can't be right. Why would anyone choose to keep getting ill? So when we eventually found out it was mold, a good friend of mine who worked in the mold remediation business came over to my apartment and I was literally in bed. I was like, I had fatigue, I had a swollen eye, I was so dehydrated, like I drank a bottle of red wine every evening. You know, I'd wake up in the morning like, because the mold takes all of your moisture. And I had creaking bones. I had like a mimicking arthritis. It got into my body. So I was like an old woman. So it was really confronting. And I guess that's why I do what I do now, because I've seen what it looks like to feel like an old person in your body, and it's not fun. So that's my driving force now, to like keep reversing my age and you know, into the biohacking and the health span space. But yeah, so within 24 hours we'd moved out. We were told the house was unsafe. It had been tested, air sampled, and we never went back. We never went back to live there again, and we lost all of our belongings. And I spent about 18 months in treatment trying to get this mold out of my body.
Tell me how saunas were useful in that period.
Well, what was so interesting is I had bought a sauna. I had one in the house, and it was the only thing that used to make me feel better. And before I knew what was wrong with me, I knew that once I had an infrared sauna and I had a really good sweat, I came out, I felt amazing for a few days, and then I sort of started feeling rubbish again. So it was kind of this cycle of feeling okay and then not feeling okay. But the saunas were just an absolute lifeline. And I think now we know the research, like it's, you know, they do extend our lives. Like doing saunas regularly is, yeah, there's been a huge Finnish study, which I'm sure you're across, but they are an absolute game changer.
Because they're clearing out the toxins. That's the key, right?
Yeah, they're doing so much. And they're also teaching the body how to fight infection, because it's getting your body at such a high temperature that it can really quickly go in, and like as if when we have a fever, right? Like we're often trying to stop fevers, but fevers are actually we need to let our body have a fever sometimes, unless you're tiny little kids and you don't want them to have fits. But that's the body's natural way of fighting something. So the sauna really helps the body to do that. So if there is stuff going on, it really does get to that sort of, fighting piece.
So you mentioned that, I want to just go back a few moments. You mentioned that there was a genetic predisposition to be more impacted by mold than your husband.
Yes.
I think in the book you say that it's approximately 25% of the population have that same genetic predisposition. Am I correct?
Yeah, yes, it's part of the celiac family, so the HLA-DR or DQ, and that means that your body doesn't really know what to do with mycotoxins, so spores. So they kind of come into the body, and the body will normally go, oh, I don't like this, it shouldn't be in my body, and you'll sweat it out. It will come out in your urine or your feces. So you'll poo it, pee it, sweat it. So that's kind of what happens. But with my body, my body goes, oh, we don't know what to do with this, we'll hold on to it. And then it just starts growing, and it kind of becomes a bit of a host, a bit like parasites in your body, where it will just keep, and it stays in there. And then for some people, it will go in their lungs, some people in their brain. I had it growing up in my nose called marcons. So it was up here, lodged in there.
Yeah.
And that's the final part. There's a protocol called Shoemaker, which is what most people do when they're going through a mold detox. It's a sort of a triangle, the Shoemaker protocol. And the final piece of the puzzle is VIP, which is actually getting rid of the mark-ons in your nose. So you have to, I spent 12 months knowing I still had mold growing here, which was really hard. It's like, this is not, not a nice thought at all. And I think about this in the book, but this fear and this sort of post-traumatic mold disorder that I talk about, it's such a real thing. And when you come into contact or you're exposed to mold again, the body just goes into a state of anxiety because it's such a scary thing to go through.
Is there any evidence or idea around the percentage of residences that would be affected by mold?
So they say 30%, but it is definitely more than that. Like, I have a mold company on the Central Coast and we're seeing ridiculous numbers. Like, it's 1 in 2 houses have mold.
Yeah.
Most houses have mold. Even my house from time to time gets mold again. And I'm really fastidious. It's a natural environment, and we need mold. It's part of our ecosystem. It's not all bad. But the black mold, the water damage, and those spores is what causes, the real problems with people's health. But some people are living in black mold like you wouldn't believe, like some of the houses we see and children and people, and it's everywhere on the walls, and retirement homes and hospitals and, psychiatric wards and hospitals that have got mold, and it's a big problem. It's a huge problem.
But one that can be addressed.
It can, but it requires a lot more support from the government, from Medicare. There's no rebate on testing. GPs need to be trained and upskilled on mold. It's not their fault. They actually don't know how to test for mold. They don't have access to those tests. There's no rebates for anybody. So most people can't afford to get well when they live in mold because it's such an expensive piece. I think there was a lady in the Sydney Morning Herald last week that said she spent $1 million trying to sort mold out in her house, which
wow.
I would have sold it. But anyway, or just knock it down. But I think, she had the money to fix it, but a lot of people don't, particularly people living in social housing, and, it's a real issue. There's some standards just came in last November from America that Australian mold remediators need to adhere to, but it's still not enforced. So there needs to be a lot more work as far as legislation, governance and support.
This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan to build the business that you want and the life that you want. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. And you can also check out our books, Made to Thrive, which is about the 5 roles of a CEO. Becoming a great CEO rather than just a good CEO in your business. Second is Onboarded, which is about hiring and onboarding great people, making sure that you give yourself the greatest chance for people to succeed in your organization. And then third is Bigger Isn't Better, Better is Better, which is about building a business that is better rather than bigger. It's not about building a little business. It's about building a business that compounds, a business that you can actually fall in love with again. When people hear the word biohacking, some people might think tech bros. They might think...
They would.
Yeah, they might think there is a culture around it, or there are people who are operating out of the safety of medicine. What is biohacking?
Biohacking essentially simply is about hacking our biology. Yeah, that's the literal definition. But for me, it's about just taking control of your health. It's about preventative health. It's about looking for what are some of the evidence-based therapies, techniques, and protocols that we can do. And a lot of them are really the basic things that we need to do to support ourselves as we age and to support good health as we age. Biohacking has got a connotation of Silicon Valley, tech bros, of Brian Johnson, don't die, reverse your age to the same age as your son. And we're hearing a lot more. There's a lot of, it's very male-dominated industry as well.
Yeah.
We're beginning to sort of see some, the extreme behaviors. And I think that's quite polarizing for normal people like us, which is why I wrote my book, because I was like, this is really overwhelming and it's not accessible or affordable for most of us to do all of these things, but we still want to have the best chance as we age. And, I think we're a generation now in our 40s and 50s that are really concerned about aging, and our parents and our grandparents, they weren't. They just got on with life, and they weren't thinking about how they were aging all the time and going to the gym and taking supplements and doing all these different things. That
Yeah.
it just wasn't what they were doing. We're
And
seeing a real shift. Yeah.
And could you define health span and how, or the relationship between biohacking and health span? Because you loosely covered it there, but I just want to ground us in that.
Yeah. And I love the word health span, and I feel like it's a lot softer and a much better word than biohacking. Even though my book is called BioHack Me, it is, I think, health span and health longevity, and looking at health optimisation is a much nicer way to frame what we're talking about. But health span is essentially the amount of years that we live in good health. So lifespan is, we're going to live to 80, but we want those 80 years to be in good health. And so we want our health span to equal our lifespan. That's really the goal. And going back to my point earlier, I think our generation is now seeing our parents age, and it's quite confronting. And so we're now thinking, what do we have to do in our 40s and 50s so that we can, extend our health span so that we don't end up in aged care and, we're unable to look after ourselves, and that we're still strong, and we're so educated now on things that we can do. And there's so many incredible technologies and things, that we have access to that aren't ridiculously expensive that we can do to help support us as we age.
I saw a show last night called Tulsa King. It's got Sylvester Stallone, who's I think 80 years old, and he's just so fit. It's amazing.
He's incredible. There's a lady in my gym who's 91 and called Phyllis, and she is lifting weights. I just put a post on Instagram about her today, actually, but she is such an inspiration. And my great aunt is actually 100 in March this year as well. And she is just incredible. Her brain is probably better than some of my girlfriends in their 50s that drink too much wine and are going through menopause. I think she's sharper than them.
Fabulous. So often on the podcast here, the audience is owners in companies, executive CEOs. You talk about biohacking as being or taking responsibility for your own biology. So for someone who's running or a leader in a business, what does that responsibility actually look like in practice?
Good question. I think, as a founder, as entrepreneurs, as leaders, we're functioning at such a high level, and we're juggling so many competing demands and multitasking, and the brain often feels quite overloaded. And trying to take time to prioritize health feels like another thing on this sort of endless to-do list, but it's got to be number one. And I think the more simple things we can do, like for me personally, I've started doing 10 minutes of meditation as soon as I wake up. So just to still the mind, do some breath work. It's 10 minutes. I think most people do have 10 minutes, unless they've got little kids climbing on them, which is complex. It's taking 10 minutes just to ground yourself for the day is definitely something I think as a business owner is really important, is to create that clarity in that space before you go into the busyness of the day. Just finding time, taking responsibility and showing up for yourself. It's really easy to, look at others and be very other focused, particularly if you're a leader. If you're running a business, everything else is more important than yourself. So I think prioritizing good nutrition, movement, hydration, making sure we're not just running on coffee all day, that we've got our water bottle on our desk and we've got some good salt that we're putting in, because it's really important we hydrate with good salts, especially if we're filtering our water, because it demineralizes a lot of the water. So it's important that we remineralize. So I think there's lots of things that we can do that are really simple hacks during the day. And I think it's working what works for us. Cold showers. Rather than having to go and do a cold plunge, just do a cold shower. It's going to increase your dopamine. It's going to help your immune system, all the things that we need when we're high functioning as business owners. So those kind of things are really important.
You're learning, studying, working at the forefront of this, I guess, industry, which is really evolving over time. And we're learning a lot, and technology. I mean, Brian Johnson, who you mentioned, despite all the criticism, he is using himself as a test subject to try to get data around what works and doesn't. What do you think 10 years ago was perhaps a bit out there or outrageous that now has maybe become normal or normally accepted? Or maybe there's just too much to say?
Well, and you're so right. And I think I know Brian. I think a lot of people have warmed to Brian Johnson's off the back of his documentary on Netflix, "Don't Die." And I think we
Yes.
got a real insight into him as a father and as a human, because I've always thought of him as sort of an AI robot version of a human. I'm like, is this guy like for real? But I actually really warmed to him in that show, and he's amazing. He is a human experiment. He's pushing the boundaries. And he's completely out there and quirky, but I actually think what he's doing is, and there's also a woman called Kayla Barnes who's very similar to him. She's sort of the female Brian Johnson, and extreme and polarizing and all the rest, but also completely fascinating. And the work that they're doing is opening our eyes to what is possible. And some of it's quite full on and frightening and like, do we really want to do plasma blood exchange and so that we can be a bit younger? And it comes back to my point as well of, do we lose the joy of living when we're constantly measuring everything we do? We're constantly living in a state of sort of neurosis of
Yeah.
what we're doing. Like we lose the joy and the play. And I feel like Brian Johnson's bringing a bit of play back into his life now. He seems to have softened and he's not quite so rigid, but it is fascinating. And I think, but there's things that 10 years ago, athletes were using things like red light therapy, hyperbaric chambers.
Yeah.
They've been using them for years. Like, it's not anything that new. A lot of the biohacking technologies, it's just they're now becoming more mainstream. As the silicon tech bros have been doing this stuff for a long, long time, but athletes, they have been biohacking for a
Yeah.
long, long time.
Yeah.
And I think now it's just becoming more affordable for us to be able to go and do some of those treatments. What's great now is the research behind them. So hyperbaric chambers, like there's some incredible research being done there around working with some really great doctors in the US with Alzheimer's and looking at how that can support the brain and getting oxygen into the brain. There is red light therapy. There's so many studies there into how that can help, essentially recharge our cells and our mitochondria. So we're learning more. And I think the more we learn about the science can't catch up quick enough for some of
Yeah.
these technologies, but for some they are. Like I think with red light, we can say, okay, we safely know that there's a lot of research here and more evolving. But it is in a very quick pace evolving space. And I think peptides is something that is not really, we're not big in Australia, but in the US, it's
They're
huge.
huge. Yeah.
But, how much do we really know about them and how safe are they? And I think for me, I feel very overwhelmed and confused about a lot of these things like peptides. I go, well, are they safe or not? And I can read research on both sides. And it's, I'm on the fence with some of these things. It's tough.
I've got a friend at the moment who's contemplating or has been advised by a surgeon, asterisk, who wants to sell surgery at a very expensive cost, who's said you need to get shoulder surgery. And that was always the case previously, and that makes sense. But now he's contemplating peptides because, well, maybe I should give it a go before I go to surgery. So it's a very hard space, and it's hard, I think, as well, because the government is struggling to regulate and catch up. And because it's an unregulated market, you want the safety, it's hard.
It's frightening, I think, because there are people selling things on the black market and you're injecting these things into your body. And I'm just not ready yet to take that leap until I know more. And I think with like GLP-1s, we're learning more about the side effects. It's like with all these things, they become a big craze and then suddenly the mass people start taking them and then we see all the side effects. So for some things, I'm sitting back with my popcorn a little bit waiting and just eating research as it comes in, but and whereas there's some things I feel are really safe. And with biohacking, it's about bioindividuality. What works for me might not necessarily work for you, Brad. And I think we've got to really honor that. Something I recommend everybody should do is their DNA testing, their methylation genetic blueprint. Get your health code and see what's there from a genetic perspective. And then you can tailor and personalize everything you do off the back of that. And I think that's important. Data for me, I love testing. I love, looking at people's neurotransmitters and looking at DNA and just working with functional doctors and naturopaths to really help people get a holistic sort of protocol around their health. It's really important.
You mentioned athletes a few moments ago, and previously you've compared leaders to elite athletes or operating at that level, but without structured recovery. If recovery is the thing that drives performance, so you're held back by your absence of recovery as a leader, What are the levers that change cognitive output and decision quality, do you think?
I see it a lot in my work. Like I've worked with some really, senior executives and there's just no time for recovery. They are always on.
Yeah.
And, when I look at myself personally, and I think we were talking earlier about the other podcast interview you did with Mark Butler, and we were talking about, similar conversation. And that is
Yeah.
just was such a great episode. But, we've got to take time to recover. And even myself, I've done 2 weeks back to back of work because I'm organizing a book launch in London. So it's been crazy on the other side of the world. So this weekend is my recovery weekend, and I'm really going to make sure that I honor that and I get into nature, and I'm doing some yoga and some breath work and red light therapy. I'll be in my sauna. So that for me, I know I'm going to have a recovery weekend. But having said that, I still factor recovery in every day. I do something. If it's, I'm doing my 10 minutes meditation in the morning. I do red light therapy every other day, just 10 minutes. I think it's looking at what are the things that fill my cup, that energize me? How can I do them, and how can I make them so that they can seamlessly sort of stack into my day without it feeling like I've got to take 2-3 hours out to recover? Because it's not practical. But recovery is so important. It's the only way athletes perform at the level they do, is because the recovery is absolutely key. And
Yeah.
that's the piece that we're missing a lot when it comes to particularly burnout, is people are not taking the time to rest and recover.
So allocate time in your calendar to recover. So what about sleep? Because you talk about sleep connecting to impaired leadership, or impaired sleep means impaired leadership. So how does that connect with the quality of leadership or leadership issues inside organizations, do you think, that psychological stress?
It's huge. I think we know the statistics now on lack of sleep, and under 6 hours of sleep, and it's the equivalent of being drunk or hungover the next day. So if we're not sleeping properly and the brain hasn't had a chance to recharge, and our cells and our energy, we're just running on empty. And so then it impairs our decision making. And as leaders, they need that competitive edge. There should be things like sleep, recovery, nutrition, hydration. Those are just some basic things that set you up for the day so that you can perform at the level you need to. So I talk about a competitive advantage, and those are the key things, and they're really not complicated to do. It's like optimize and prioritize your sleep. And, there's always stuff. When it comes to sleep, if we're having sleep issues, it's normally nervous system related. There's something going on with the dysregulation, with cortisol, that we're waking up at 2-3 a.m. or we're struggling to fall asleep because we're wired but tired. So, understanding our chronotype, understanding, there's so many components to sleep. And once you fix and optimize that could be just one focus.
Yeah.
You sleep better, you've got more energy, you make better decisions around what you eat, you move because you've got more energy. So it's looking at that anchor habit or that anchor optimization piece, and how that's going to have a flow on effect to all the other areas of your life.
So do you think that background level of energy, the kind of just what's your background energy, is one of the strong signs whether or not you're in survival mode or you're really accessing your true capability?
So what you said from an energy perspective, so depending on...
Yeah. You mentioned that there's sleep and there's nutrition and
Yeah.
there's these things, the regulation that are all coming together, that leads to your level of energy.
Yes. And that's the superpower, right? If you've got good energy, it
Yeah.
means that you've got enough to give everybody in your life, and give to yourself, give to your family, give to your colleagues, whatever it might be. But if our energy levels are low and we're just simply functioning, and I thought when we look at some of the signs of burnout and, how some people are functioning, a lot of people are just, the battery's low and they're not recharging that battery. I talk about the mobile phone, and as soon as our battery's low on the phone, we plug it in. But when we're low, we push through with caffeine, or we push through with sugar, or, we just push through. And the body, in particular our mitochondria in our cells, is just getting more and more depleted.
Where do you think you've fundamentally changed your opinion over the last 10 to 15 years?
What do you mean? Where have I fundamentally changed my opinion?
Well, when I was younger, I used to think this, and now I have this very different perspective about that topic.
Oh gosh. Well, when I was a teenager, I definitely, and in my 20s, I wasn't thinking about my health. That's for sure. To be honest, I was quite hedonistic. I was a big party person, thought life was a party. I got told that at school, and my mum used to say, Camilla thinks life's a big party. It was when I got pregnant at 26 with my first son, and I was living in London, and it just changed my life. I was suddenly responsible and thinking about I was growing another person, and I needed to start eating better and looking after myself. I'd always grown up with that blueprint because my mum's like a complete health nut. So she was very progressive, very forward thinking. And so I'd had kind of had that growing up. But then I, like most teenagers, sort of rebelled and I wasn't thinking about you feel like you're invincible, in your 20s. And I felt like I was young at 26 to be pregnant, but that was a real pivotal change for me because I was suddenly like, I've got to think about what I'm doing and how I'm showing up, and you have to grow up pretty quickly. So I think things changed for me there. That was probably my big shift. And then just getting sick, like when you're unwell and knowing that my burnout was because of me and because I did that to myself, that was a wake up call, and not understanding the physiological effects of stress on my body and what that was doing to me. That was a wake up call. So that fundamentally changed how I thought about looking after myself and showing up.
What is a book that you would recommend for our audience that's perhaps had a bit of an impact on you?
I think one of the books over the last few years that I've read, I listened to a podcast with an amazing lady called Dr. Edith Egger and Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, who is a UK doctor who I love and listen to. And she went through the Holocaust and she wrote a book called The Choice, and her second book was The Gift. And it really changed my life reading that book. And it changes your perspective. And I talk about this in my book about finding the gold in the shit and adversity. And, when we go through things in life, like how do we show up from that? How do we reframe that? How do we find that post-traumatic growth when we go through difficult times? And reading her book and listening to a woman that went through so many atrocities and how positive she is, and how her gift to the world is giving people this way of reframing what happens to them. And I think it's a beautiful book. I recommend everybody should read it. And it truly is a gift. So yeah, that would be my book.
So looking at the adversity, the challenges, the tough stuff that you've been through, rather than looking at it as being problems and being negative about it, just being at peace with the fact that was a gift that put me in a better place that I am today. Is that correct?
It is. And I think that happens post the situation, because at
Of
the
course.
time you're like, this is shit and this is really difficult. And I think I've come into this year going, I am under no illusion that it's a new year and everything's going to be roses and unicorns. It absolutely isn't, And I think I'm learning this year to deal with adversity in a way of like, okay, shit's going to happen. I've got to put the skills, the tools in place to manage and deal with that and learn from whatever I'm going through. But it's also okay at the time when you're going through really difficult times to really sink into that. I think we can't, there's that sort of trying to be over positive all the time and reframe everything. It can actually diminish your feelings and emotions, and you don't acknowledge how you're feeling. You're pushing it away because it's like, oh no, I'm just going to be positive all the time. That can actually have a negative impact on your body and your stress because you're not actually connected with how you're feeling.
And I think you need to process that in that manner. Otherwise, you can just need to carry it around like a backpack full of stones that you never get rid of.
Yeah. I love that analogy. I love the backpack of rocks. It's like we're literally walking, we got to get them out. What's that expression of drinking poison? I always get this one wrong, but it's like expecting something, if you don't let go of things and we don't accept things for what they are, we're not going to move through that adversity. So yeah, I can't remember the poison quote, but it's a good one about expecting things to change when they're not going to change, that I can't remember it.
Such a good one. If only I could remember.
Put it in the show notes.
How can people learn more about you, your business? Where can they find you?
They can jump online to my website, www.biohackme.com.au. I also host retreats, so women's retreats and men and women's retreats we're going to host in New Zealand this year at Aroha, which is beautiful in Queenstown. And that's biohacking retreats as well. So giving people all the tools and techniques on what they can do to live well longer. That's the name. So there's retreats. My book's on Amazon. I'm on Instagram at BioHack Me Coach. I'm always sharing different things people can do and having a bit of fun on there as well. So that's where you can find me.
And the book is BioHack Me, which we'll put in the show notes along with those other contact details. Camilla, what haven't we covered off today that you hope to cover off?
Gosh, I think we've gone through quite a few different conversations. I think I really want I want biohacking to feel accessible for all Australians. I want it to be something that people are empowered and motivated to know that they can take control of their health. And there's so many things they can do, looking at their nutrition, cleaning up their diet, just respecting and loving yourself enough to look after yourself. I think it's just so important, and prioritizing our sleep. And yeah, it's doable for everybody. We just need to show up for ourselves.
Thank you. Camilla, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today. I mean, your journey in and of itself is fascinating in the way that you've come through in such a positive manner and want to help people on the other side of it. And the work that you're doing helping those people is really valuable and relevant. So thank you for your time today.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.